All right, so we're now going to cover the contemporary spiritual. We've already covered the traditional spiritual the last time we met. And we've learned a lot of things about why we need to preserve the heritage of the spiritual as solo artists. So today I'm just going to continue the presentation, but I'll go over a few points that we did cover on the last presentation. Dvorak himself said, "I'm now satisfied that the future of music of this country must be founded upon what are called the Negro melodies." I believe that is still so true today. The spirituals is such an important, important art form. And I call it an art form as well as a musical form, because anything that's art stimulates, encourages, also is something that must be preserved and something that we, for lack of a better term, keep sacred. You know what I mean? As far as, fostering or making sure that other people know about this art form. Too many people think that spirituals, and this is why we're coming into the contemporary part, too many people think that spirituals and gospel are the same thing. Y'all notice that in churches, and you notice that when people talk, they think that spirituals and gospel is the same thing. So here's your definition. I didn't put it on the slide, but here's your definition. Well, matter of fact, I'm going to ask you, what is your definition of gospel music? Anybody? Anybody? It's taking y'all a while to think about it, huh?
I would say, I guess, any music that is glorifying God, that has to do with God. Because there's different types of gospel music. Like, there's the contemporary gospel, there's, what's the other word?
Traditional gospel and, yeah.
Well, I guess any song that has to do with God, talking about God.
But spirituals talk about God for the most part.
Well, spirituals are more, what am I trying to say? Kind of like, I don't know, I guess, okay, gospel stemmed from spirituals.
Okay, that's true.
So it's like,
No, you're getting there. You're getting there. That's what you have to think about. You had something, I know you do.
In gospel, the form is a lot more depending on which type of gospel. There's the form can be different, and like traditional, the form is kind of consistent, like.
Okay.
But in contemporary, there's, different forms. Some songs have,
Kind of hard, is it?
It's kind of hard, but I know gospel has specific chords.
Okay.
And specific cadences.
Okay.
That's used. Certain things that make gospel. But the Negro spiritual was more than a song that slaves would sing on Sundays.
Okay.
They would sing it when they're working, when they're in their huts. They would, it was their only, one of their only forms of
Expression?
And
Well, people would say that about gospel music these days. There are people like my mother grew up listening. My mother had, this is dating me, my mother had that old radio with the knobs that you tune. she still, although she doesn't have that old radio, I think it's in the attic somewhere, but she still wakes up in the morning and listens to the radio for her gospel music. And believe it or not, that radio is on in the kitchen 24 hours a day until she goes to sleep. She may be watching television, but that radio is on because that's her fix. Gospel music is still that encouragement. So again, your definitions are not separating gospel from spiritual. You got anything?
I think the thing that can separate them is that gospel music was music created in the American Black Church, and they're both as a result of the circumstances Black people were put in, and kind of shows that spirit. But gospel music was created in the African American church.
So were the spirituals.
But spirituals, what separates spirituals is that spirituals were passed down by word of mouth. Gospel was usually written down, and spirituals kind of like, and spirituals were songs made up to give messages or codes, and so they both have different distinctions.
Okay.
And probably where they originate is a little different.
Getting a little bit closer. You said that spirituals were passed down from one to another, wasn't necessarily codified until we started writing them out. But believe it or not, early forms of gospel music went from church to church to church without anything written down. Not too many African Americans it wasn't that they weren't written down, we just didn't have access to written music. There were songs that we learned from another church. Most gospel music back in the day, back in the 60s, 70s, was learned by rote. In other words, we learned from somebody else's church so that we can sing better than somebody else's church. Everybody hit on something unique. You talked about the chordal structure. You talked about the presence of both forms. You talked about the uniqueness of how gospel is now. Basically, gospel music is music that encourages the people of God utilizing biblical text, normally out of the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. That was the original definition of gospel music. Its purpose is to edify you as a Christian. And that's what gospel music does and still does today. Whereas spirituals were a form, as Dartish already told us, is a form of music, and you did as well. And you did as well. All three of you did it in some type of way, a form of slave music. But gospel music specifically talks to us today about our spiritual Christian lives and how we are to walk that life and how we are to search God. Even though spirituals speak on that, as she already said, spirituals were also code amongst the slaves so that the white man does not know what they're talking about, particularly when we're talking about escape or running away. But modern day gospel music is strictly for our spiritual edification or our encouragement for us today. And it's been that way really since the 50s, 40s, 30s of time. So good, I'm loving this dialogue. It's because all of a sudden you are forced to think, wait a minute. And that's the reason why many people say that spirituals and gospel are the same, when they technically are not. This is my friend Rudolph Clear, and I didn't have a picture last time. That's him. His father, Rudolph Clear, he lives down in Florida. He is the founder and the chief executive officer or something like that of the Negro Spiritual Scholarship Foundation. And this word was in one of his writings. This historical group of uniquely American songs is now recognized as a distinct genre of music. Come on in. In the United States, we cannot seem to get enough of Negro spirituals. Contemporary composers, arrangers, and vocalists continue to explore and enliven this unique genre. We are still seeing the Negro spiritual strong today. I'm talking about really, really strong. But we're now into what we're talking about now, the contemporary spiritual. Now, we talked about this in the last time, the traditional spiritual style. The dates I'm giving are fuzzy. One day, me and Dr. Williams are going to have a debate as to when these dates are. but I will say that traditional style arrangements of spirituals before 1960 and contemporary style after 1960. This is, the dates I'm giving are my estimation, mine, so therefore I can defend it. But other musicologists and those who study the spirituals, we may have a different timeline as to when truly we began the contemporary style of spiritual. Let's see. I believe I have the wrong slide up. No, I don't. I have the right slide. When we talked about the traditional spiritual, we said in the last session, it goes straight to the point, melodic structure. The chorus, usually the chorus is sung twice, then a verse, and then a chorus, and then a verse, and then a chorus, depending upon how many verses there are. Sometimes on longer spirituals, we sing the chorus twice, we sing the verse, then the chorus, and then we may lap on the remaining verses before we sing the chorus again. But usually that's a typical style. That's not etched in stone, but that's typically how a spiritual is sung in concert style. Simple embellishments, nothing crazy, nothing elaborate. Simple accompaniment or accompaniment style of the Romantic classical era, which was basically reason why, simply because many of the composers who would arrange spirituals were classically trained pianists or other instrumentalists or vocalists, and it was during the Romantic era that many of these spirituals have been composed, or the Romantic era style of playing. We focus more on words and meaning, not on vocal acrobatics when we're talking about the traditional spiritual. It is emotionally driven. And I showed you examples of people singing the spiritual without a whole lot of vocal dexterity or fireworks, but you heard the passion, you heard their meaning, you heard their heart. And of course, it was the full embodiment of the heart of the slave as conveyed in traditional spiritual. So now we're going to talk about the contemporary spiritual arrangements from my dating after 1960. Although contemporary spirituals are used in many contemporary styles, such as gospel or pop or even rap, you listen to some rap music, you hear spirituals in rap. He's looking at me like, really? Listen to some rap texts, you'll hear snatches of spirituals even in rap. You will, and you do rather. Our focus, however, is going to be primarily on the classically performed contemporary solo concert spiritual like we did for the traditional one. So, some things that you will find in the contemporary spiritual, and it's a whole lot more than what you will find in a traditional. First of all, melodic structure can be complex or even blurs the original melody line. In other words, a composer may start off with the traditional line of a spiritual, the traditional melody line, and all of a sudden change the notes or change the form. Dave Ragland, for example, is real famous for that. Jacqueline Hairston, a friend of mine, when she's doing compositions, she's very famous for changing things around and making the melody do something different. That is one of the main things about the contemporary spiritual. The melody line can be blurred from the original. The second one, the spiritual form modified through composed verses. Now, if you've taken your history classes and your theory classes, through composed specifically means that all the material is new and is additional material. So if I've given you a modern day spiritual, you may find that there'll be added words that are not part of the original spiritual text. You guys singing in Jubilee Singers, you're doing some contemporary stuff like from Moses Hogan, etc., even Dr. Kwame, where there's additional words that may not be part of the original traditional text of the spiritual. So that is very common for contemporary spirituals. That's when the composer has added his or her own words to the mix of the words. Embellishments can be inserted based on the style used. Now, this is where contemporary spirituals can blur lines, and that's why sometimes we can think of a spiritual being the same as gospel. Jacqueline Hairston, when she does her spirituals, she allows the singer to make a choice. Do I want to sing a spiritual very classical, or do I want to sing a spiritual in a gospel sense? For example, I've given the spiritual Guide My Feet right now to two people. Andrea Jones, who was here, of course, when I first got here, and Akela. Andrea, because she's now singing it still with the University Choir when they go on tour sometimes. When Andrea sings it, she sings it very, very classical. But when Akela sings it, she sings it gospel, as if she was in church. She uses her classical voice, but she relaxes the primp and poise of it and takes us to church when she does her version. That doesn't mean that Andrea doesn't take us to church, but Akela really gets into the gospel form of that same exact spiritual. And the composer permits that. Yes?
I can, based off of what you said, like, now that I think about it, we do sing it very different.
Mm-hmm.
Like Andrea, like she's real classical, because she would sing it, Dr. Duke would ask her to sing it on tour sometimes, and I've heard her sing it maybe 2 or 3 times, and she's very classical-like, but I sing it like...
You sing it like you're going to sing it in church, but you still use your technique and everything, but you sing it like you're going to sing it in church. And that's something also about many of these types of spirituals. You'll hear jazz elements in certain spirituals. There are some spirituals where you really will hear a lot of jazz in the movement and a lot of jazz in the voice. So that may cause the voice to all of a sudden come off of the classicalness of the tone to groove with what's going on with the music. The music going on underneath you will dictate the style of the spiritual or the way you will sing it. I mean, that's one thing cool about contemporary spirituals. When I'm doing Balm and Gilead, I have this very classical style. But I do a spiritual of Jackie Hairston, and you heard it when we did the performance in the Appleton Room. I Don't Feel No Ways Tired. She's combined, I'm a seeking for a kingdom, hallelujah. I'm a seeking for a kingdom, hallelujah. In a kingdom, seeking for a king, in that kingdom, hallelujah, hallelujah. I got my words crossed up right there. There's a better day coming, hallelujah. When I leave this world of sorrow. So that's a traditional spiritual. But she tacks on James Cleveland's, I don't feel no ways tired. I've come too far from where I've started from. So she's tacked on somebody else's words. Again, we already covered that, utilizing different words in the spiritual. All right, so as I was saying about Jacqueline spirituals, she combined James Cleveland's gospel to a traditional spiritual. So when I get into the James Cleveland part, I'm not prim and poised, as you heard my performance. I'm down into the gospel. So the embellishments or anything you do with these types of spirituals, it's better that the style that the spiritual is in influences how your embellishments are. Complex accompaniment style, giving more emphasis on the accompaniment or the piano or instruments. Some have a feeling of being orchestrated with thicker, complex structures. This is where the contemporary spiritual really is different. This is where the composer kind of shows their stuff. Moses Hogan, for example. I always tell you guys with Moses Hogan spiritual, you just sing it straight. Because Moses Hogan put everything in the piano because he was a virtuosic pianist. That's why there were many times Dr. Williams can attest to this, and I knew Moses Hogan as well, where when Moses Hogan played for someone, what he wrote down was different than what he played. And he then began to do his own embellishing. That's another tradition of another thing of contemporary spirituals. Sometimes there is some flexibility in the score. And that depends on the composer. The composer will let you know. And the one thing wonderful about contemporary spirituals, many of these composers are still alive. They have Facebook pages, they have websites, and you can sometimes go onto those websites or Facebook pages or even contact the composer themselves and find out how they want their stuff performed. And that's one wonderful thing about contemporary spirituals as well. But you will hear thicker piano or thicker music, or you may be singing in one key and the piano may be adjusting in and out of that key type of thing. It requires a little bit more musicianship. Because it's easy to sing a traditional spiritual sometimes. But when we're singing now with these more thicker composed pieces, it requires a higher level of musicianship. Contemporary and commercial styles can also be used in these types of spirituals. You'll hear jazz, blues, you'll hear some soul, you'll hear some world music, African rhythms, African music, Indian music even. You'll hear world music, you'll hear gospel, of course. You'll hear some church hymnody. You'll hear some atonality, even bitonality, weird things going on. You'll hear some ragtime. Allegory is when the composer may give you a chance to do something different. There's a set of pieces I'm learning where a composer has given me a set of words, and then from that point on has told me to modify the melody line how I feel. In other words, I got my bass melody and my set of words, and then the next word is etc. and no other music on the score, which means I am creating the music, which means that every time I sing the piece, it's going to be something different. That's allegory. Yep. Avant-garde, that's where the music really gets weird. When you are doing one thing and music is doing another thing. I've heard spirituals done with Coke bottles and with, I'm serious, and with different types of clapping or whatever. Avant-garde does not necessarily mean strange. It means varied ways of expressing art. Of course, I already told you there are rappers that are using spirituals in their rap. Focus more on words and meaning. And by the way, I heard someone told me that there's a composer who is writing a spiritual that's supposed to be done in a rap style. So when I find that out, I'll see how that is and see who can do that. Anyway, focus more on words and meaning, additional text, or blending of more than one spiritual used. There are times that a composer will put two spirituals together. Sometimes he'll put them together with two soloists. But there's more emphasis on the words and the meaning. I'll get to that when I get to my next slide. Vocal acrobatics, I call it acrobatics, ad-libbing, etc., are often permitted and even encouraged, sometimes written in the score. Jacqueline Hairston writes stuff in the score. There was one time, one of the pieces I do of hers, what she wrote in the score, I was like, wow, I may have a B flat on that day. And she's like, Gwen, just be you. Just do you, and we will find you at the end. So often with some of these composers, vocal acrobatics are often permitted and even encouraged. Now, having said that, well, I'll get to the next slide when I get to that. Emotionally driven with more focus on the art of music and the text. Different than our contemporary spiritual where we are focused on the words and focused on the slave text, and we are still emotionally driven. But the contemporary spiritual is the composer's way of adding to art. So when we perform it, we are almost creating something new sometimes. Some composers are now getting more and more experimental. So it becomes more art. Yes, we have the emotion. Yes, we have the passion. But we also combine all of that with making the music art. And you'll see that a lot with the contemporary spiritual. Some more things. A required adherence to the specific requests of the composer, either written in the score or discussed, like I said, many of our composers are now still living with the composer. Ad-libs and embellishments are normally given in the score, or the composer will indicate this in commentary, either in the score or in discussion with you. The original soloist of the piece, now that we're getting into contemporary spirituals, obviously we will hear the first run of a spiritual. The first time the composer composes it, the soloist who premiered the piece. Usually that original soloist will set the style, and from that point on, we consider that as being what the composer intended. Although, one thing about composers, they hear their piece for the first time in performance, and they go, I didn't like how that come out. Let me change this. Composers often do change their pieces, which is, again, making the music the art, as well as the emotion and the passion. So there are specific scores sometimes where the composer says, I want it done this way. And then there are times in which the composer says, okay, this is a blueprint, but take it yourself. Like Dave Ragland again. He gives us a blueprint. There are some things, yes, he wants, because he modifies the lyrics accordingly, or the melodic line accordingly. But then he'll allow you to be what you want. And many of the composers are like that, but there are some, they want it strict. So that's when you begin to get to know the composer. That's when you begin to understand the history. Composers who have just passed away within the last 10 years, someone has written a dissertation on some of those composers. Or there are maybe some books on some of our older composers who were living in the 50s and 60s and 70s. A woman by the name of Eileen Southern, she passed away many years ago. She wrote a book that covers many of those current composers of that time as she was writing the book. And much information about those composers are in her book. Dr. Williams has that book. I'm trying to think of another archivist. His name will come to me. He just passed away about 3 years ago. He was a faculty member here on Fisk campus, and then had a library of black music. That library is in Chicago at Columbia Music. And he archived many things, did many annotated bibliographies. Some of the stuff that we were working on with your research project is from his stuff. Floyd is his last name, it just came to me. Samuel Floyd, there it is. So many musicologists, especially African-American musicologists, have already written on some of these composers, both dead and alive. There's a person who's written some works written a thing about Moses Hogan already. So we're getting history as well of those who just passed away. But the good thing is many of our composers are still alive. And for some of them, just write them an email. I'm singing this piece. How do you like this to be performed? Many of them are honored that you're singing their pieces even. So we can communicate with the composers their specific requirements. Compositions still embody the heart of the slave, but more contemporary works cater to the audience of the black man or woman of today, period. I forgot the period. Many are forms of protest music containing political wording as well as the spiritual texts, or other texts that preach or convey a spiritual or impactful message while pulling away from the slave motif. Now, many of these contemporary spirituals are talking to us as we are today, from the 1960s protest movement to the 1970s soul power movement to the 1980s identification movement to now that we are reliving certain things that happened in 1968 that are happening now today. And composers are now taking the breath of what's going on in our society, and not just America, but even composers overseas, and mixing that in their spirituals, having the music probably hit the heart, or having the words mixed up to hit the heart. And their intentions are not to remind us of the slave, but to remind us of what's going on today. So that's also a component of contemporary spirituals. Some contemporary spiritual compositions are more art song in nature, with through composed poetic wording added to the traditional text. These are some of our contemporary Negro spiritual composers. Undine Smith Moore, we've done, Torrin has done a piece of hers. Betty Jackson King, you both have done Betty Jackson King pieces. Joseph Joubert, George Walker, Evelyn Simpson Currington. I know her sister. She's an opera singer. I understudied her, Marietta Simpson. Roland Carter. Roland Carter is alive. You're doing one of his pieces. He's alive and well, and he's going to be in Memphis in the month of April. But he's still composing. I think he's teaching in Chattanooga. Ollie Wilson. Robert Lee Owens, Lena McClin. She lives in Chicago. Robert L. Morris, Coleridge Taylor Perkinson, Roland Carter, okay, that's a repeat. Hale Smith, Richard Thompson, he lives on the West Coast, and I worked with him on a set of spirituals that were written by, a set of art songs that was written by another composer when I did the African American Art Song Alliance. Ulysses K, of course, Dr. Kwame, and he does many arrangements. Wendell Whalum was the director over the Morehouse Glee Club back in the 80s and early 90s. We know about Moses Hogan, Uzi Brown, Jacqueline Hairston, I mentioned her a lot. You're doing one of her pieces, of course. Marquez, Sylvia Odin Lee. And I put down, I meant to move Moses Hogan back to over here. These are some of our new current composers. Roy Jenkins, Damian Sneed, who combines gospel as well as spirituals. Sean Okpebholo, who teaches at Wheaton University in Chicago, or Wheaton, Illinois, Chicago. Valerie Capers, Godwin Sado. Michael Chen is a friend of mine. He was the artistic director at the not Metropolitan Opera, sorry about that, Opera Memphis, when I was a student at University of Memphis. He's white, well, Korean white descent. And we're seeing more spirituals now being composed by other races of people. So with the time I have, making sure I got everything, I'm going to let you hear some examples of contemporary spirituals in performance. This is a friend of mine named Robert Sims singing Jacqueline Hairston's My Good Lord. See if I can get this back on. Start it again. I think the volume is down. I'm going to stop this right quick so I can get the projector setting. To just duplicate. Let's try it again. You hear that piano? Yeah. Just get up off your knees and ask the mighty God we serve for a blessing if you please. Say, and he's ad-libbing as we're going along. If you want that spiritual, let me know. I got it. Now she's ad-libbing as she's playing. That's not part of the original score, what she's doing. See? the key change is not in the score. That's ad-libbed. Yeah, that's Robert Sims doing My Good Lord's Done Been Here. All right. Hope to start where I wanted it. This is Roy Jennings. Roy Jennings is a church musician in New York. Does many things with gospel and jazz styles.
I find Roy's music to just have really rich harmonies and
This is just a little bit of what
and I feel like
this
the voice
piece
is
is.
still able to be exposed. And there's an element of improvisation which I love, and I'm really enjoying working on his music.
That's the composer playing for him. See, the music underneath is different than what she's singing. Okay, y'all want me to try to get that piece, right? That's the person that's singing is Andrea Jones Sojoya. I've worked with her before. She's amazing. She was part of the Porgy and Bess tour, and her husband is on Broadway right now, I think. All right, y'all have heard you've heard Dwayne Leonte. You're singing one of his pieces. This is Damian Sneed. Let me see. Let me do Come By Here, Good Lord, Come By Here. This is just the audio. Traditional spiritual added with a lot of craziness in the piano. Makes you want to go. What you're hearing is written in the score. They've modified some things as well on their own. Of course, he's kind of modifying his own accompaniment. Here we got a gospel ending. Yep. The man who was singing is Lawrence Brown Lee. Let me go ahead and stop that track. I forgot this plays, keeps on. Young man that was singing is Lawrence Brown Lee, international opera singer, tenor, born and raised in the Pentecostal church. And when he goes home after doing the gig, he gets that lead or bass guitar and plays for his church. common ordinary person, so to speak, with an international operatic career that has taken him all over the world. This is Dr. Gwendolyn Brown, Ain't It That Good News? I'm gonna do a little bit of this one. This is him singing it himself. He keeps a traditional style with a little bit of a modern gospel in the chord arrangement. I'm only going to play a little bit of that one. I just wanted you to hear that some contemporary composers still use some traditional elements in what they do. Looks like that one went down. It's a friend of mine named Angela Brown. Let me see. She's doing a composition. Let me see what I had as notes here. This is Joseph Joubert. I think this is the city. Which one did I say I wanted to do? Come Down, Angels. She tends to be very decorative, the composer in the piano, as you can hear. Modifications of the original melody. I'm gonna stop it right there, but you can tell there's still some traditional elements. This is Michael Ching, a Korean white composer, composing a piece of Hold On. Notice how the piano's different tonalities going on with her melody. Stop it right there. Yep. And if you want to do that piece, I can write Michael and ask him to send it to me. But that's his version of Hold On. Let's see. Somehow that one. Sylvia Olden Lee. Now this is a choral version, but there is a solo component to the beginning. I'm gonna pass it and go straight to the. I'm gonna pass it a little bit. Kathleen Battle. She's still alive and still doing spiritual concerts. and she's doing her thing. I can hear that all day. Let me see what else I have before I call it. I don't have much left. I just want to pull this up right quick. This is a spiritual database put together by an archivist by the name of Randy. Can't think of her last name right now, good Lord. But she has put together a database of all of the spirituals that have been recorded so far, and she's continually adding on to this database. When I put this together as a presentation with the PowerPoint presentations, the video that's being made, I will also have an annotated bibliography of all the resources I've done so that you can have it yourself and that I can, of course, share it with others because I want to keep a dialogue. Her name is Randy Jones, and she has put this together. This database has records of recordings as far as you can find out where the recordings are, etc. This is where I've gotten some of my information as well. Coming to a conclusion. I did this as a presentation, and I do thank Vando for videotaping this. I didn't ask him, he offered. Because we were just talking about it on the yard, and he was like, why don't I come in and videotape this? So I'm very much grateful for him for helping put that together, and I thank you guys for being a part of this as well, as part of the dialogue as well. I'm very passionate about the spiritual, and I'm very passionate about its performance styles. And I want basically the whole world to understand that yes, we at Fisk University, we kind of have an ownership about it because of the Jubilee Singers. And I want to keep an open dialogue with other musicologists, performers, etc., on the spiritual performance style. But I wanted to present these things to you guys. Obviously, you'll be doing a lot of spirituals while you're here, but I just don't want you to just get up there and sing. I want you to have the knowledge and the understanding, not just the text and the music, but also how these things are, how these spirituals are formed, contemporary, traditional, so you know those specific styles, so that when you get on the stage, you're almost like an expert as well as you're growing and learning in your own musicianship. So I am very passionate about this project. As I learn more and as I get more information, I'll share it. And even in maybe expand on this once I get more dialogue from others. But I do thank you guys for being a part of this two-part series. I didn't think it was going to become all of this, never know. But I've poured my heart into this, and hope you guys got something out of it. Any questions or comments or anything like that?
Just don't forget to get that piece.
Get that piece for you. All right, I get that one for you. Anybody else? You like the Old Glory? Her version? Okay, I'll see if I can get that piece for you. Anybody else? Again, I'll put this on Canvas and YouTube and LinkedIn and share it amongst the community. Hopefully I can get it published as well. But thank you guys for coming to class today. We will not have class next Wednesday because the University Choir is on tour. All right? Thank you guys. Class is dismissed.